I always knew something was off. Growing up, my parents never treated me the same way they treated Lauren. She was their golden child, the one who could do no wrong. If she wanted something, she got it. If I wanted something, I had to justify why I deserved it. I told myself I was just imagining things, that maybe I was overreacting. But deep down I knew. It wasn't until I turned 18 that I learned the truth. It happened on a quiet evening, just after my birthday. I was looking for my birth certificate to finalize some college paperwork. My mom kept important documents in a locked drawer in her desk, but I had seen her open it enough times to know where she hid the key. I figured she wouldn't mind if I took a quick look. I wasn't expecting to find adoption papers with my name on them. I remember staring at the document, my hands shaking as I read the words over and over. My name, my date of birth, but not my parents' names. The people I had called mom and dad for 18 years weren't my biological parents. I don't know how long I sat there, frozen, before I finally confronted them. When I asked, my mother went pale. My father sighed, rubbing his temples like he had been waiting for this moment. "We were going to tell you," he said, but his voice lacked any real remorse. It turned out I had been adopted as a baby, and they never told me. It didn't matter, my mother insisted. "You're our daughter, and that's all that counts." But it did matter. It explained everything. The way they treated Lauren like she was special while I was just there. The way they never really looked at me the same way they looked at her. I wanted to scream, to cry, but instead, I just walked away. After that night, things changed. I stopped trying to impress them, stopped craving their approval. What was the point? I was nothing more than an obligation to them. Then the accident happened. It was sudden. A truck ran a red light, hitting my parents' car at full speed. They didn't survive. I felt numb when I got the call. Grief should have been the first thing I felt, but instead, all I could think was that I had never truly belonged to them. I had spent 18 years trying to fit into a family that had never fully accepted me, but nothing could have prepared me for what came next. At the reading of the will, I sat next to Lauren in the lawyer's office. She looked devastated, red eyes, shaking hands. I wish I could say I felt the same. The lawyer cleared his throat and started reading. Our parents' assets, including their house, savings, and investments, amounted to more than $500,000. And every single penny was left to Lauren. I didn't even get a mention. I expected some kind of reaction from her, maybe guilt, maybe surprise, but she just sat there, nodding as if this was exactly what she had expected. I couldn't breathe. Not because of the money, but because of what it meant. Even in death, they had made it clear, I was never really their daughter. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. Lauren finally turned to look at me, her expression unreadable. "Did you know?" My voice came out hoarse. She didn't answer right away. Then, after a long pause, she said, "It doesn't change anything." That was all I needed to hear. I walked out of that office and didn't look back. I didn't think Lauren could sink any lower. After everything, after learning I was adopted, after our parents died and left everything to her, I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd have the decency to let me stay in the house a little longer. At least until I figured something out. But no. It happened 2 weeks after the funeral. I had been staying in the guest bedroom, trying to keep out of her way. I wasn't even asking for much. Just time to find a job, to save up enough to leave. I thought she understood that. But one evening, I came back from a walk to find the locks changed. At first, I thought I had the wrong key. I tried again, jiggling the handle, but it wouldn't budge. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around to see Lauren standing on the porch, arms crossed, lips curled into something between a smirk and a sneer. "What are you doing?" I asked. Her response was a slow blink, like she was trying to decide if I was worth answering. "You don't live here anymore." I felt the blood drain from my face. "What?" "I changed the locks," she said. "You need to leave." My stomach twisted. "Lauren, I don't have anywhere to go." She shrugged. "Not my problem." I wanted to scream at her, to shove past her and force my way inside, but I knew it wouldn't do any good. Lauren was always our parents' perfect little angel, the one who got everything she wanted. Now she had it all, the house, the money, everything. And she wasn't going to share a single penny with me. I took a step forward. "At least let me grab my things." She pulled out her phone. "If you don't leave now, I'm calling the police." I froze. She wouldn't. Would she? I had my answer when, not even 2 minutes later, a police cruiser pulled up to the curb. 2 officers got out, looking between me and Lauren. "She's trespassing," Lauren said, her voice so sickeningly sweet it made me want to vomit. The older officer, a tall man with graying hair, turned to me. "Ma'am, do you live here?" I swallowed the lump in my throat. I did. "But my sister." "She's not on the lease," Lauren cut in. "She has no right to be here." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Lauren, please." "I need you to leave," the officer said. His tone wasn't unkind, but there was finality in his voice. I wanted to argue, but what was the point? Legally, I had nothing. No claim to the house, no money, no backup plan. So I left. I walked away with nothing but my phone, my wallet, which had exactly $23 in it, and the clothes on my back. I had never felt so alone in my life. That first night on the street was the worst. I had nowhere to go, no one to call. I spent hours wandering, trying to figure out my next move. Every cheap motel I passed was still too expensive. My only option was sleeping outside. I ended up in a park, curling up on a bench, hugging my knees to my chest. It was colder than I expected. Every noise made me jump. A car passing by, footsteps in the distance, the rustling of leaves. I barely slept. The next morning, reality hit me like a brick. I had no home, no food, no money. And if I didn't figure something out fast, I was screwed. Finding a job was harder than I thought. Everywhere I went, I got the same responses. We're not hiring. You need experience. Come back another time. I was starting to lose hope when I stumbled into a rundown diner on the outskirts of town. It smelled like burnt coffee and grease, the kind of place that probably hadn't been deep cleaned in years. An older woman stood behind the counter, wiping down a menu. She looked up when I walked in, raising an eyebrow. You lost. I hesitated. Are you hiring? She snorted. You ever wait tables before? No, I admitted. But I can learn. She sighed, looking me up and down. I must have looked awful. Wrinkled clothes, dark circles under my eyes, hair a mess. $10 an hour, she said finally. Cash at the end of the week. You screw up, you're gone. Relief flooded me. I won't screw up. She rolled her eyes. Yeah. Name's Rita. Be here tomorrow morning. 6 a.m. sharp. I nodded so fast my neck hurt. Thank you. She waved me off. Don't thank me yet. That diner became my lifeline. The work was brutal. Long hours, rude customers, constant back pain. I had never been so exhausted in my life. But I kept going because I had no other choice. My coworkers were a mixed bag. There was Maria, a single mom working double shifts just to keep her kids fed. There was Tony, the cook, who had a permanent scowl but made the best pancakes I had ever tasted. And then there was Jake. Jake was something else. He was in his early 20s, tall with messy blonde hair and a cocky grin. He worked the grill in the evenings and spent most of his shift annoying me. Did you piss someone off or do you just like suffering? He asked one night after watching me struggle to carry a tray of drinks. I shot him a glare. Screw you, Jake. He smirked. So piss someone off. Got it. Despite his teasing, he wasn't all bad. Some nights, when we closed up late, he'd walk me to the bus stop, making sure I got on safely. Other nights, he'd split his tips with me when he saw how little I made. I hated that I had to rely on people's pity, but I was desperate. By the end of the first month, I had saved up enough for a few nights in a motel. It wasn't much, but it was better than sleeping outside. But just when I thought things were getting better, life threw another punch. One night, after a long shift, I went back to my motel room to find the door wide open. My stomach dropped. I stepped inside, my hands shaking. My bag was gone. My money, my clothes, even my phone charger, everything was gone. I stumbled back outside, my heart pounding. The guy at the front desk barely looked up when I told him what happened. Not my problem, he muttered. I wanted to scream. I had nothing. Again. I had no idea how I was going to get through the next day. But I had to. Because if I gave up now, I had nothing left to lose. I never thought I'd get out. 4 months, I'd barely survived. Working long shifts at the diner, counting every penny, sleeping wherever I could. But I refused to give up. I refused to let Lauren win. Eventually, things started to change. It happened the day I found the studio apartment. It was a tiny place, barely 300 square feet, with peeling paint and a fridge that made a strange humming noise. But it was mine. The rent was ridiculous at $1,200 a month, but after spending too many nights either on the street or in dingy motels, I didn't care. I signed the lease that same day, using every dollar I had saved from the diner. But that meant I needed more money. I took a second job at a 24-hour convenience store. The hours were brutal. During the day, I waited tables at the diner. At night, I stood behind the counter, ringing up cigarettes and energy drinks for exhausted truckers and drunk college students. I averaged 4 hours of sleep, sometimes less. I told myself it was temporary. I just had to make it through the next few months. At first, I kept to myself. I didn't trust anyone. Not after what happened with Lauren. Not after being thrown away like garbage. But the people at the diner, Maria, Tony, and even Jake, didn't let me shut them out completely. Maria, the single mom, started bringing me homemade meals, claiming she accidentally made too much. Tony, the grumpy cook, gave me an old space heater when I mentioned how cold my apartment got at night. And Jake? Jake never stopped being an annoying flirt, but he also walked me home when I worked late, refusing to let me go alone. You need a knife, he told me one night, handing me a cheap switchblade. Or better yet, a bat. You look like you'd be good with a bat. I snorted. What does that even mean? It means you've got rage, princess. He wasn't wrong. Therapy was Maria's idea. She found a local support group that offered free sessions for people dealing with trauma. It's nothing fancy, she admitted. Just a bunch of people talking in a church basement. But it helps. I didn't think it would. But I went anyway. At first, I just listened. People talked about their struggles, losing jobs, being betrayed, hitting rock bottom. Some stories were worse than mine, others not. But for the first time, I didn't feel so alone. I started talking. It wasn't easy, but little by little, I let the words out. About my parents, my adoption, the inheritance, Lauren. About being thrown out like I was nothing. Nobody judged me. For the first time in my life, I felt heard. Then I met Nick. It happened at the convenience store. He came in around 2 a.m. looking half dead and dropped a Red Bull and a gas station sandwich on the counter. "Rough night?" I asked, scanning his items. He ran a hand through his messy dark hair and sighed. "More like a rough life." I smirked. "Yeah, I get that." He looked at me then, really looked at me. And something passed between us, like an unspoken understanding. From that night on, Nick became a regular. He'd stop by after his shift at the auto shop, sometimes grabbing food, sometimes just to talk. He was covered in tattoos, had a permanent 5 o'clock shadow, and carried himself like someone who had seen too much. One night, as we sat outside the store, sharing a bag of chips, he told me his story. He had grown up in the foster system, bouncing from one house to another. He got into fights, got arrested, and nearly destroyed his life before finally pulling himself together. "You remind me of me," he said, crunching on a chip. "Except you've got more fight in you." I raised an eyebrow. "You don't even know me." He grinned. "Not yet." Nick and I got close fast. He didn't just listen to me. He understood me. He knew what it felt like to be thrown away, to struggle, to survive when the world wanted you to fail. "You ever think about school?" he asked one night as we sat on the steps outside my apartment. I scoffed. "I don't have time for that." "Bullshit," he said. "You're smart, Kate. Smarter than half the idiots out there with degrees." I rolled my eyes. "And how am I supposed to pay for school? I can barely afford rent." "There are ways," he said. "Scholarships, financial aid. You could take night classes. You don't have to do it all at once." I wanted to argue, but the truth was, I had thought about it. Back when I was still living with my parents, I had dreams. Dreams that felt so far away now. Nick didn't push, but he planted the seed. And over the next few weeks, it grew. Maybe he was right. Maybe I wasn't meant to just survive. Maybe I could build something better. And for the first time in a long time, I let myself hope. I never thought I'd get here. For years, my life had been a constant struggle. Working endless shifts, counting every dollar, never knowing if I'd make rent. But things had finally changed. I had changed. It all started when I got the office job. I almost didn't apply. It was a corporate assistant position, entry level, but full-time, with benefits and a $50,000 salary. Compared to scraping by on minimum wage, it felt unreal. Nick was the one who convinced me. "You've worked harder than anyone I know," he said. "You deserve more than just surviving." I hesitated. What if they don't hire me? "Then you try again." So I did. I spent an entire night perfecting my resume, using the library's computers to fill out the online application. I didn't think I'd even get a call back. But a week later, my phone rang. "Kate Parker," a woman's voice said. "We'd like to schedule an interview." My heart nearly stopped. I showed up in borrowed clothes. Maria had lent me a blazer, and Jake, surprisingly, had bought me a pair of shoes when he found out I didn't own any professional ones. I was terrified. The office was sleek, the people polished. I felt like an imposter. But I smiled, shook hands, and answered their questions with every ounce of confidence I could fake. 2 days later, I got the job. For the first time in my life, I had stability. Adjusting to an office job was harder than I expected. The hours were long, the expectations high. My boss, Claire, was a sharp, no-nonsense woman who never smiled, but she saw potential in me. "You learn fast," she said one afternoon, eyeing me over her coffee cup. "Keep this up, and you'll move up quickly." I had never had anyone believe in me like that before. Things with Nick got better too. He was my rock through everything. While I built my new life, he kept pushing himself as well, taking extra certifications at the auto shop and planning for our future. One night, after a long shift, he showed up at my apartment with takeout and a nervous look on his face. "I had a whole speech planned," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "But I'm just gonna do this." Then he pulled out a ring. I blinked. "Nick. Marry me, Kate." I started laughing, half in disbelief, half because I was so damn happy. "Yes," I said. "Of course." We got married 6 months later. It wasn't a big wedding. Just a small ceremony with a few close friends. Maria cried the whole time. Jake gave the worst best man speech I had ever heard. Tony, the grumpy cook, surprised everyone by showing up in a suit. It was perfect. Finding out I was pregnant wasn't part of the plan. I had spent so much of my life fighting to survive that I had never imagined bringing a child into it. But when I saw the test, 2 little pink lines staring back at me, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Nick was over the moon. He picked me up and spun me around, laughing like a little kid. "We're gonna be parents, Kate." For the first time in my life, I wasn't scared of the future. And then Lauren showed up. It was late, almost midnight, when I heard the knock. Nick was asleep, and I was curled up on the couch, half watching TV when the sound jolted me. I frowned. Nobody ever visited us this late. When I opened the door, my stomach dropped. Lauren stood there, looking nothing like the sister I had once known. Her blonde hair was a mess, her clothes wrinkled and dirty. Her eyes, once so full of arrogance, were hollow. She looked broken. "Katie," she whispered. "Please." For a moment, I couldn't speak. I had imagined this moment before in different ways. I had dreamed of her showing up, begging for my help, and me slamming the door in her face. I had told myself that if I ever saw her again, I'd make her feel as worthless as she had made me feel. But standing there, looking at the wreck she had become, I felt none of that, only shock. And a tiny, dangerous sliver of pity. I took a slow breath. What do you want, Lauren? Her lips trembled. I have nowhere else to go. I stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. She was homeless, just like I had been. I never thought I'd see Lauren like this. For so long, she had been the one with everything. Our parents' love, their money, their house. When she threw me out onto the street, I swore I'd never forgive her. I told myself that if she ever needed me, I'd do exactly what she did to me, shut the door in her face and walk away. And yet, here she was. Homeless. Broke. Begging. I should have slammed the door. Instead, I let her inside. Lauren sat stiffly at the edge of the couch, avoiding my eyes. She looked different, thinner, her expensive clothes replaced by a wrinkled hoodie and ripped jeans. I stood near the kitchen, arms crossed. Nick was watching from the hallway, his expression unreadable. I just need something to get back on my feet, she said finally. I let out a short laugh. You mean like how you helped me when I was homeless? She flinched. I know I screwed up, Kate. Screwed up. My voice sharpened. You called the cops on me, Lauren. You made me homeless. Her face crumpled. I thought I was doing the right thing. I scoffed. The right thing for who? She had no answer. For a long time, we just sat there in silence. I should have told her to leave. But something inside me, maybe pity, maybe something else, stopped me. I sighed. I'll give you 2,000. That's it. Lauren's eyes widened. Kate, don't thank me, I cut in. Find a place, find a job, and don't come back here asking for more. She nodded quickly. I will. I promise. I didn't believe her. For the first few weeks, I didn't hear much from Lauren. I assumed she was doing what she said, finding a place, getting her life together. But I should have known better. Maria was the first to warn me. I was at the diner catching up with her when she gave me a long, careful look. I saw your sister, she said. I frowned. Where? Outside a bar, Maria said. She was drunk, fighting with some guy. I sighed. Of course she was. Then, a week later, Jake sent me a text. Your sister's a mess. Just thought you should know. I didn't respond. I wanted to believe Lauren was trying. But every time I heard about her, she was either getting kicked out of another job or getting into some kind of trouble. One night, I got a call from an unknown number. When I answered, a man's voice came through. Is this Kate Parker? I tensed. Who's asking? I'm calling from Lucky's pub. Your sister is here. She says she has no one else to call. I closed my eyes. Is she drunk? Very. Nick watched from across the room as I hung up. Lauren, he guessed. I nodded. He sighed. You're not actually going, are you? I hesitated. I should have let her deal with her own mess. But something in me wouldn't let me ignore the call. Nick shook his head. You're too good, Kate. I didn't feel good. I felt tired. When I got to the bar, Lauren was slumped over a sticky table, mumbling to herself. The bartender gave me a sympathetic look. She hasn't paid for her drinks. Of course she hadn't. I paid her tab, then grabbed Lauren by the arm. Come on. She groaned but didn't resist as I dragged her outside. The cold air seemed to wake her up slightly. She blinked at me, her face flushed. You came. I let out a sharp breath. Yeah, I came. She sniffled. I don't know what's wrong with me. I knew. Lauren had never struggled a day in her life, until now. She didn't know how to handle failure, how to rebuild from nothing. But I did. I didn't say anything as I led her to the car. I let her sleep on the couch that night. In the morning, she was quiet. I'll leave soon, she muttered. I hesitated. I should have let her go. But I remembered how hard it had been for me when I had nothing. How no one had helped me. So I made a decision. You can stay. Just for a little while. Her head snapped up. What? But you have to help, I said firmly. You don't pay rent? Then you clean. You cook. You do something. I expected her to argue, but she nodded. Okay. I didn't believe her. But I was wrong. At first, she was awkward about it, like she wasn't sure how to do basic things. But when my pregnancy took a bad turn, something changed. One night, I was in the kitchen when a sharp pain shot through my stomach. I gasped, gripping the counter. Lauren rushed in. What's wrong? I tried to wave her off, but she didn't listen. She grabbed my arm, helping me to the couch. Kate, this isn't normal. She wasn't wrong. My pregnancy had been difficult. Constant nausea, fatigue, dizziness. The doctor had already warned me I might need bed rest. But I had been pushing myself too hard. Lauren grabbed my phone. I'm calling Nick. A few minutes later, Nick came rushing through the door, his face pale. What happened? I hated how scared he looked. Lauren answered for me. She almost collapsed. She needs to stop doing so much. Nick turned to me. That's it. You're staying home. I started to protest, but one look at him, and I knew he wouldn't budge. Lauren crossed her arms. And I'll handle things here. I blinked. You. She lifted her chin. Yeah. I owe you. I didn't expect her to actually follow through. But she did. She cleaned. She did the grocery shopping. She even made dinner badly at first, but she learned. One night, I found her sitting at the kitchen table, staring at a piece of paper. I frowned. What's that? She hesitated before sliding it over. It was a job application. I looked at her. You're trying again? She exhaled. Yeah. For the first time in a long time, I saw something in her that had been missing before. Determination. I didn't know if she would actually pull it together. I didn't know if she would ever really change. But for now, she was trying. And that was enough. I should have known it would end like this. For a while, it seemed like Lauren was changing. She was helping around the house, keeping busy, even trying to find a stable job. I wanted to believe she was different, that maybe, after losing everything, she had finally learned. But deep down, I was waiting for the moment when it would all fall apart again. And it did. Lauren lost another job. She had been working at a small clothing boutique. Nothing glamorous, but steady work with decent hours. I could tell she hated it. She complained constantly about her boss, the customers, the long shifts. But she needed the job. Or so I thought. She came home one afternoon, slamming the door so hard I felt it from the couch. I was 6 months pregnant now, mostly stuck at home, trying to take it easy. I glanced up. What happened? She threw her bag onto the floor. I got fired. I sighed. Lauren. It wasn't my fault, she snapped. My manager was out to get me. I folded my arms. What did you do? She scowled. Why do you assume it's my fault? Because this keeps happening, I said flatly. Her silence told me everything I needed to know. That night, she packed her things and left. She didn't say where she was going, and I didn't ask. Nick told me not to worry about her. She's an adult, Kate. She'll figure it out. I tried to believe that. 2 weeks passed. Then, late one night, I heard a knock at the door. I knew who it was before I even opened it. Lauren stood there, a single bag over her shoulder, looking exhausted. Please, she whispered. I have nowhere else to go. I should have said no. I should have turned her away, the way she once did to me. But I didn't. This time I set clear rules. 1 month, I told her. That's it. She nodded quickly. No money from us. No breaks. If you don't get a job, you're out. She hesitated but nodded again. I understand. I didn't think she did. To my surprise, she got a job within the week. A cashier position at a grocery store. Not glamorous, but stable. The pay was minimum wage, $18 an hour, enough to eventually afford her own place. For a while, things seemed okay. She showed up to her shifts, came home tired but sober, and even started saving a little money. It almost felt normal, like we were two sisters just living together again. Almost. Then she missed a shift. I had been asleep when Nick shook me awake, his expression tense. Lauren's not home. I frowned, still groggy. Maybe she's working late. He shook his head. She was supposed to be off hours ago. A sinking feeling settled in my gut. I tried calling her. No answer. I tried again. Nothing. Nick sighed. You know where she is, don't you? I did. I found her outside a bar, leaning against a wall, drunk off her ass. When she saw me, she actually grinned. Kate, what are you doing here? My stomach twisted in anger. Lauren, what the hell are you doing? She hiccuped. Celebrating. I clenched my jaw. Celebrating what? She waved a hand lazily. Just life. I stared at her, barely able to contain my frustration. You missed work. She rolled her eyes. It's one shift. One shift, I repeated. That's how it starts, Lauren. She scoffed. You don't get it. You're right, I snapped. I don't get it. I don't get how you can keep doing this to yourself. Her smile faltered. I just needed a break. I shook my head. No, Lauren. You needed to grow up. She didn't argue. She just looked at me, her face full of something almost like shame. But shame wasn't enough anymore. Back at the apartment, Nick was waiting. He took one look at Lauren and sighed. That's it. She swayed slightly. What's it? I took a deep breath. You're done here, Lauren. Her face fell. Wait. We're paying for your first month's rent somewhere, I said. That's it. After that, you're on your own. She blinked, her mouth opening and closing like she was trying to find the right words. But, no, Nick said firmly. No more chances. I expected her to fight, to argue. But she didn't. She just looked tired. Okay, she whispered. A week later, we helped her move into a small rundown apartment across town. It wasn't much, a cramped studio with stained carpets and an ancient fridge. But it was hers. She stood in the doorway, looking around like she didn't quite believe it. This is really it, huh? I nodded. Yeah. She glanced at me. Will we still talk? I hesitated. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to believe things could go back to normal. But we were different now. So instead, I said, that's up to you. She nodded slowly. I'll try. I gave her a small smile. Good. Then I turned and walked away. I don't know what will happen to Lauren. Maybe she'll get her life together. Maybe she won't. But for the first time, I'm not responsible for her choices. She has to figure this out on her own. And as much as it hurts, I know it's the right decision.